Hello everyone, Shay Brophy here again. Part 2 of the project. We started a few days ago with our interview with... Hello everyone, Shay Brophy here again. Part 2 of the project. We started a few days ago. We got to talk to Dan Uccello today. We're inside the studio for the Discover Montcalm Podcast. My guest today is Duane Weed. Duane, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to talk on this project. As I said in the introductory episode, the goal is just to talk to people. I think that's a thing that we need to do more of in this world. It's how we learn, it's how we become motivated, and it's how we get the story of everybody's struggle, the grind, and what they did to get where they're at in the world today. Duane, obviously, as I said, we're here in the studio of your podcast. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background and how the podcast came to be today?
Well, I started DW Video in multimedia way back in 1984. Coming out of college, I'm a Bulldog from Ferris. In 83, things happened. I started my business, and fast forward, got married in 87, and moved to this location here in Howard City. We started with a trailer and a small little room. The shed that you saw when you pulled in,
Yep.
That used to be the office. I started the business in Morley, moved it here. Fast forward, I'm now 40 some years in doing DW Video. But in 2022, I started the Discover Montcalm Podcast. But if you jump back to like 2016, I started Discover Montcalm with the idea it was going to be a documentary on the county. And I found that I was finding, it wasn't hard to find people to be part of it, but nobody wanted to pay for it. Because what I was looking at was like a 2 to 4 year deep dive into the county, which meant it was going to cost a lot of money.
Sure.
And, I did some initial interviews with people that I thought were movers and shakers around the area, and they were. It then turned into, the pandemic, and then I had to think about it. Kind of forgot about it, and coming out of the pandemic, I started looking at things that I had on my plate. And I went, I forgot all about Discover Montcalm. What am I going to do with Discover Montcalm? Am I going to ditch it? And I don't know where it triggered, and I went, make it into a podcast. I'm still telling Montcalm's story, but do so through a podcast. And as of today, in February of 2026, I'm 172 episodes in. I've got probably a dozen in the can waiting to go, and I'd prefer that than to have to come up with a story idea every week.
Yes.
Now it's like, okay, which one do I pull off the shelf? What do I do? And, so that's a quick little where we're at today.
Sure. So you said the initial concept was for it to be a documentary. What was the motivation for it? Why did you even want to start it to begin with?
Well, as I go through my filter of life and get older, I get to be an old sap that gets, memories mean a lot to me. I had done a storytelling video with my family, my mom and dad, back in the early 2000s, where I interviewed my mom, I interviewed my dad, and then I brought them together to say how great it was to have me, and it was so great that they had my brother. That's just a joke. I think things are funnier in my head than they really are. But as I looked at that, Mom passed in 2011, and I started looking at that interview going, wow, I have this piece of history with my parents that I took it to the next level. After Mom passed, I asked my dad, let's go on a car ride. Put cameras in the car, and we started just south of Morley, where my dad in 1946 and the family came from the Lansing Hastings area up until the Morley area, and we drove the path of what would have been kind of the history of my parents and my dad, where we talked, and on the road, we're telling stories, I'm learning more and more, and we went out to the house that, the cabin that the family was there, we went back to, the different locations that I remember, and then that turned into, let's get my dad's brothers and his sister together to see if the stories that my dad told me were true. Get his siblings involved. And that was great, and about a year later, the youngest of my dad's brothers passed away. And I'm thinking to myself, there's history. Mm-hmm. So the podcast, not the podcast, but the documentary was, I'm running a production company. I do production. I go out, I can do all this. Why not do it on the county? And again, I had a lot of people that wanted to be part of it, but nobody wanted to pay for it. And because I was a for-profit business, I couldn't go out with all these grants that were available.
Sure. Yep.
So, long story short, that's kind of what started it, and that's kind of what the podcast has turned into. So
I think you said 172 episodes, is that right?
As of today in February, yeah.
Okay.
I've already got 173 in the computer. I don't have it completely edited yet, but it's going to be, it's a weekly podcast for me, and just touching on different stories and people and attractions, and Montcalm County's my playground. If you're in Montcalm County and got a story, I'm here, but I'm putting a little twist in that, which we can talk about in a minute.
Sure, absolutely. So 172 episodes of a weekly podcast, that adds up to a few years that you've been doing.
We're into our third year.
So from day one, what has changed with your show to where we're at today?
The location, the backdrop, for one. I used to do it with a different set of cameras than what you're seeing here.
Sure.
I've always done them with 3 cameras. And then I have to go in and edit. And I would do all the cuts that this little switcher here, when I'm interviewing people, I'm sitting here and I'm making these cuts as we talk. Not to this one, but that's how I do it, because it saves me time. It saves me time. It goes back to my days of college where I cut my teeth on live production. So, with that, I'm always trying to, make it easier. So the cameras have changed, the microphones have changed, the backdrop has changed. I used to sit side by side, but I like this way better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's more personal. But that took quite a few episodes to get from here to there. I think what has stayed the same is the way I do it, and what I hope people get from my podcast is that it's a conversation that we would have over a cup of coffee at a local restaurant.
Yeah.
Or if we're having a drink at the bar. It's that kind of, it's loose. I don't have an agenda other than trying to get to know the person behind the sign, whatever that sign is. If they're a business owner, or they work somewhere, or they're part of a nonprofit, get to know the people behind the sign, and I think that personalizes it a lot, and that's been my goal.
That's fantastic. We actually, for those of you that don't know, we recorded an episode of the podcast before we came onto this live, and I noticed as I was looking in one direction and trying to be a good guest, you were all over the place doing all these different things at once, while also maintaining a full conversation and not losing a beat.
Yeah.
What's something, for those that are out there listening, that people don't know about a podcast host has?
Well, everybody does it differently. Now, podcasts kind of started out maybe more audio only, which would just be a couple microphones and a recorder, and we can go sit in your car and do it.
Yeah.
Things are more portable that way. Because I come from the world of production, this stuff was easy. Now, I've gotten equipment that has made it even easier as it's progressed, but for me, as you mentioned, I don't even think about this because it's what I grew up with.
Sure.
I'm used to live directing. I'm used to doing those things. This just gives me a platform. You know, I got my audio here, so if I'm not doing it quite right or I need to hear you a little bit more, I can work over here. And I know that when we talk, I said, no matter where I look, always look at me, because I am staring down at this laptop that's in front of me. I'm looking at the cameras. I'm making sure that everything on this little monitor is right and trying to stay in the conversation. And hopefully I did you proud. You know,
I was honestly, as I was noticing you doing all these things, I was thinking in my head, like, this is for what comes out in the end, the final product being a conversation, there's a lot more going on than just that for you.
Yeah.
You've got all these buttons and fancy gadgets over here and all these things, and it all goes together and puts out a polished, finished product. And it's really cool to see all the different pieces that you're working with all at once.
People do it easier than this, where they just do audio, and they put it out for a podcast that would be on iHeart or one of those platforms, you know, or even YouTube. You know, they can do a podcast audio only. I'm in production, so I'm not going to do anything less than what I would put out. Does it make it more work? Oh yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. You know, I won't kid myself. But am I happy with the product? I got to be happy with it before I put it out. And
Sure.
Am I going to learn something new? All the time. You know, and the bottom line is I get to meet people and get to know them. Now, unfortunately, I can't tell you what episode yours is going to be, and you go 6 months, a year ahead of that. I won't remember, you know, like we talked about, you interviewed Dan, I interviewed Dan. I can't remember what his podcast, what episode
Oh,
he
I'm
was
sure.
on.
Absolutely.
You know, but you can go to discovermontcalmpodcast.com, type in Dan, it'll give you his podcast. You know, so I'm like, it's got a search engine within my podcast website to find that if you know the guest that you're
Sure.
looking for.
So would you say this is the final product? Like, this is as fancy as it's going to get for you, or do you have hopes to change it up a little bit? Or
You know, I guess what's that say? Never say never.
Sure.
Or what? I don't know. I do know that here, you know, as soon as we're done, the cameras get baggies over them to keep the dust off them. I keep everything here, so if somebody calls me on my way back, because I also teach at the Montcalm Area Career Center, and somebody says, hey, you know, are you available tonight? I can come in, a few buttons, I turn on, it's ready to go.
Yeah.
I want this to be accessible, but unlike you, I'm not live, so I don't know if I want to be, you know, at this point. Everything has a production. You know, I could take this switcher and do the same thing between the cameras and go live with it.
Sure.
It would still work. It doesn't fit what my mission is, but who knows? I mean, I guess never say never. I don't know. I do know I want to get a system set up with the 3 cameras that I can take on the road, that I can make it as easy as what you're seeing here. Cameras on a mic stand that don't take up a lot of space, a tablet that I can do all of what I'm doing here, but I can go on the road and walk in and do it at their location. That's my goal, because I can come in and I can talk to a business owner about their business, but what really sells is if we were doing it at their location.
Sure, absolutely.
Because that's where their business is. And to come in and do a behind the scenes walkthrough of their retail shop, their manufacturing facility, their attraction, whatever it might be, the story's at their place. Now, here, it's nice and easy. I made it easy. It's a little bit more when I go out on location, but that's my goal, that to be able to be as portable as I need to be to tell that story anywhere. So that's my next personal goal, is to be able to do these more at people's locations, and to be able to bring the cameras in and do a walking tour and kind of, you know, tell us about your business. You know, I did one with the the cheese place, cheese house here over by Lakeview, and watching them make cheese. you know, except I didn't want to go. You know, it's almost 100 degrees in there, and the humidity was terrible. My lenses fog. It took a while before we could,
Yeah.
you know, get in and do it. But what better way to talk about making cheese when you can see it right in front of you?
Yeah.
You know, I want to do that to other businesses. You know, so whether you got a restaurant or any kind of business, let's do it there. But until then, come here, have this conversation here, because we can still talk about it.
Well, that's what it's all about, is being able to talk. Never stop adapting, though, right?
Oh,
Like, that's the name of the game.
Yeah.
If you don't adapt, you get left behind.
I say adapt and modify.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, because we're always going to adapt, and we're always got to look at modifying it. So adapt and modify is something that I'm always doing. And am I an expert? I'll never be an expert, because I'm always a student. You know, I'm always learning this. You know, what else can I do? How else can I do this? You know, don't get complacent and say, oh, I got it, I'm done.
Right, yes.
No.
Absolutely.
You know, I told you before we did your podcast that I've been spending the last two and a half weeks doing nothing but SEO on my Discover Montcalm Podcast website. I'm rebuilding pages. Everything is more, I'm building on my page now, there's a Montcalm resource, a Montcalm guide that is starting to be built up as a place where you can go and find information to all the county stuff. You know, all of things that people would, you know, I need to make it more of a guide. And I'm working on a couple other things that if I can just figure it out, you know, me and databases are not always the best partners, and finding the right stuff on the thing. But I've got a list of like 3,700 businesses in Montcalm County that I want to turn into a directory. Right now, it knows more than me, and it bugs
Sure.
me.
Sure.
But I did learn that early on to ask for help. Don't sit, just like we talked about failure in your podcast and how you don't wallow in it. I'm not going to sit here and spend, you know, I spent like 3 hours trying to figure this out. It didn't work. I reached out to somebody that knows more than me. Now I'm just waiting, you know, for us to fix that, because I'd like to bring those 3,400 businesses in Montcalm into my directory on my site and even open it up more. Did I think about that 2 years ago? No. No. I'm always looking for ways, and even though I don't have it, I hope to soon.
So we kind of touched base on it a little bit there, but the whole concept of these conversations that I'm having with people is to learn what the journey has been to get to where you're at today. Now, you've been in this industry for a very long time, obviously. With the podcast, it's been a couple of years. I can't imagine every day has been all sunshine and rainbows, has it?
No, not at all. You know, I got into owning my own business because I was teaching up at Ferris. I'd been down to Drayton Plains, Waterford area at the production at a cable company down there. I came down there for my internship. There was 2 people that were part of the crew that I brought in. I just knew them from, one was a classmate, but there was 3 of us, and I was out producing both of them. You know, I'm young, I'm single, and I love production, and I have a production truck and a studio that somebody else paid for. All they want is content. I did aerobic shows, I did talk shows, I brought bands in. You know, my general manager was like, oh my God. I'm like, but he wanted content, so I was building content. Remember coming back from Christmas break, and I'd been hired full time. I went from my internship to being help, you know, full time. Coming back from Christmas break, he brings me into his office, the general manager does, and says, we're going to take you back to part-time. Okay, talk about, you know,
Yeah.
I'm loving what I'm doing down there. I'm loving the fact that I'm producing, and, you know, I've got probably 6 hours a night of programming that I'm doing myself. Multiple programs, multiple stuff, because that's who I am. I mean, I don't just look in the wading pool. I jump in the deep end, and but I'm enjoying it. And I thought, wow, I'm full time. I thought I was gonna be here for a few years, learn more before I made that jump. And I went, oh, okay. So I walked out of his office, walked into my office, made a phone call back up to my professor at college, Bob Hunter, God rest his soul. I said, do you know of anybody? Because I was only a year out of college.
Sure.
Do you know anybody that's hiring? And he goes, well, you can come back here and be my production assistant and be the teacher's aide to help the program you just walked out of be my teacher's aide. So we did that. Ferris was they were quarters at the time, before they went to semesters.
Oh, okay, sure.
And so I was with him for two quarters, and then the other quarter, he didn't teach that class, and the other instructor taught it. And I respected that professor a lot for what he taught me, but our personalities were the way we dealt with people, and again, I was always taught to respect, and I did. I the knowledge I gained from him, but I'm thinking to myself, I can't work for this guy. I'm going to be stressed, and and I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I remember it was a Thursday. Again, we talked in your podcast about, we don't know the exact date.
Yeah.
I just remember it was a Thursday. I hopped on my motorcycle. I went back to Waterford. A good friend of mine, Greg, was down there, and I said, I'm coming down. I got to vent. I got to do something. I got to figure life out. I just been given this curveball. I don't know what to do. And we spent the weekend down there, and I remember coming back, because when I came back from Waterford, I moved back in with my folks under a little different arrangement than when I was going, but had have a great relationship with my parents, and they were like, I walked up to my dad and I says, I think I want to start my own business. And that was the start of me being an entrepreneur. And he goes, well, you're going to need some equipment, you're going to need some money, which means you need a loan, and you're just out of college, so your credit probably sucks. I will co-sign. And I remember this, and I don't know if it was quite this, but he says, I will not be paying it back.
Yeah.
In other words, you can't get this without me. I'm not paying it back. And I knew that if I failed, paying him back meant it was going to cost me more interest than what the bank was. But it was the way that we got started. And then, in '86, I met my wife. '87, we got married, and haven't looked back. And you talk about struggles. Yeah, sometimes there was gaps between paychecks.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you're like, what am I gonna do? I don't know what to do.
No, nothing's free.
And you learn to be a better salesman. You learned, because I can talk to people, but I wasn't made to be a salesman. But I knew that I had to learn, or I was going to go hungry.
Right.
And a good friend of mine, I was in the business for a handful of years, and a very good friend of mine, Mark Brewster, was he was a producer. He worked for Meyer, went up the ladder, did a lot of stuff through them. But at the time, I could get you to do whatever I wanted. I mean, if you wanted me to promote you, I was really good at promoting you, but I couldn't turn the mirror back on me. So I reached out and I said, Mark, I need help. And one of the things that he said, and this was way before social media.
Oh, sure.
you need to be on camera promoting yourself. Now we're talking VHS tapes.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so if you go back and you're looking at the way that we could get the media, the message out, he says you need to be on it, and you need to be the one selling you. And he would actually help. He would record me. Now I could record you, but I couldn't get the recording me part. It took a while, but that helped me learn. And learning meant that I was going to fall on my face a few times. You know, sometimes that between paychecks was a little bit longer, but it made me who I am, and I wouldn't change it for the world. But you know, through that, I think we all find a way.
Well, and that's the thing. When we stop trying to find a way is when we really get into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Something that we talked about during the podcast earlier. When you get to rock bottom, this is one of my quotes that I've learned.
I love that, by the way.
In my journey.
I love that.
I wish I could tell you the name of the guy that I learned it from, but when you hit rock bottom, that's a great place to start building. You got to have a foundation, right?
You got to have that.
And nothing comes easy. You just laid out a whole bunch of struggles along the way. What's your main takeaway from the struggles, and how did you apply them to get where you are today?
You got to keep building. You know, as soon as you stop, you become stagnant and you don't go anywhere. And you know, I tried a whole bunch of things, and you know, I'd like to say I have these ideas that just never had the finances to really make them go. But I keep pushing, you know, and I know that there was a few times, there was a company in Reach City that I was doing some video work for, and I was talking to the general manager, and he goes, yeah, we want to do a brochure, you know, photography, lay out the whole brochure, here's what we want, can you do it? Because I'd already built a relationship. Well, yeah. I got out in my car and I went, what the heck did I just do? I know nothing about print. I can take the photographs.
Sure.
I can help with the content, but I don't know anything about that print process. But I remember reading a book. It was Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And there was a lot of tips in there, but the one that just stuck is that the Henry Ford principle. Surround yourself with people that know more than you, you know, because he's the one that set up the assembly line. And they talk about a story where he had a row of buttons on his desk. And if he ran into a problem, because he said he wasn't always the smartest, but he knew what button to push to get the answer to your question. And the part that I kind of gathered from it, they actually took him to court to think that he wasn't smart enough to run his own company. You know, and they were asking him all these questions that were geography and blah, blah, blah. And he finally, I don't know if he put his fists down, but finally said, Judge, any question that comes across, I have these row of buttons, and I can get that answer because I put people in place to answer these for me, because I don't have to know it all. I just have to put the people, and the judge threw it out. You know, and I went, oh. So I needed to go out and find a graphic designer. Well, where am I going to find a graphic designer? I don't know a graphic designer. You know, and I, you know, had faith and found it, you know. Norm Powell, I ran into him. I learned about him. We talked. We shared the same vision. And unfortunately, he passed way too early, which led me from him to David McCord, who still around. He's now on my advisory board at the Career Center. But I would work with these people, and I learned that just like an employee, now they're not employees, they were subcontractors to me, that I could hire these top-notch people, pay them, make a commission off from them, while I'm overdoing what I do best. And I went, that Henry Ford principle kind of works. And so, first time I was asked to do a website, Sure, I'll do a website. I got out my car. What did I put my,
Yeah.
Okay, now I gotta go find a couple web designers. Got a job coming up, I was asked by a place that had done some work, can we do this big database order taking system? Which means programming. I don't know about you, but I look at all those programming codes and I might as well be the deer in headlights.
It's like reading a different language.
And I went,
absolutely.
Again, the Henry Ford found Robert. Robert's been great. We still are, that order taking system's still working a decade plus later. It needed to be updated because technology doesn't just, we got this and it works. Technology keeps going. But it's one of those things that I surrounded myself with people that know more than me so that I could do it. And the same thing with animators and that. Animation never intrigued me, but it was part of what I could do. I found a couple animators, ran into Frank. Frank has been, a wonderful part of the growth of my business, but, it kind of helps us both. And you run into people, and the one thing that I did learn that all of these people become my friends. You talk about failure. I had hired a guy way back. Now I'm going back before I brought the equipment in-house. I was working through a place, an editing place down in Grand Rapids, 2 partners. I was using the one partner's editing equipment. Well, I needed the other partner's service for this one customer that I had. And so I booked time, went in, the guy's doing the work, and then I had to excuse myself to use the restroom. And when I came back, I noticed my customer was agitated. I'm like, I kind of looked at him, how you can do this without really saying words? He went,
sure.
I went, uh-oh. Well, after we did the job, got what we needed, we went out to dinner afterwards, and I said, what's up? He says, if you're the kind of guy that works around those kind of people, I don't want to work for you anymore. And I went, what? What just happened? Well, while I stepped out, he immediately went into sales mode and tried to take him from me. That's not a good.
Sure.
And I went, oh. And I had to tell the guy, I said, I knew nothing of this. I mean, I don't agree with that. But the one thing that it did is I called his partner afterwards and said, that equipment that I've been renting from you, not the stuff that your partner has, but the stuff I've been renting for you, you want to sell it? And I bought him out, brought it home, and I haven't looked back.
Yeah.
And it pissed his partner off.
Oh yeah, I bet.
His partner called me swearing at me. I said, stop. You're the one that started this. You don't take a customer from a customer that's coming in using your services. Sure. And I went, oh, there's character involved in this whole thing. I mean, things that I was always taught, my mom and dad, that was part of growing up. You respected people. You didn't go behind their back. You didn't do things. There was that line of character. But that wasn't a huge failure. I could have lost that customer, but it was like, oh, that's part of my story.
Well, and what a great learning experience, too.
Oh, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
And you talked earlier about maybe not knowing the answer, but being able to find the answer. Something a lot of people have always, a phrase that's out there in the world, always be the smartest person in the room. I firmly disagree with that, because for me, I don't know about you, but for me, being the smartest guy in the room isn't usually going to happen.
I was never that. So I don't know what that's even like.
Agreed. Same here. But knowing how to get to the solution, how to get the answer, knowing somebody who does, that's the trick right there. I mean, if you can use your resources, which in a way maybe that does make you the smartest guy in the room, I don't know. But having the ability to use resources and accept, like, I don't know what I'm doing, I need help. We're all going to get to that point somewhere in life. Being able to accept it is a big part of not only the rise to success, but it's something that everybody's going to go through, and it happens more often than not, honestly. It's just whether or not we're able to accept that I need help. A lot of
And
people don't like to ask for help.
part of that, there's a word called networking.
Sure.
We network with people. You found out about me because you interviewed Dan, and Dan told you about me because I've been networking with Dan. Okay? It's interesting how that goes, and I've been trying to teach that in my to my students at the Career Center, is that how important networking it is. Doesn't mean that you're going to get a job from that person, but get to know them, and they can be a support.
Just a resource.
Yeah. Because when I started the podcast, the first thing I did is I reached out to Phil, who I knew was helping people start their own podcast. And I had used him a lot for audio work, because he's done a lot of radio and a lot of that stuff. But then he was off into this, so I called him and I said, thinking of starting a podcast. Can you help me? And he was very gracious in saying, yes, I can. And because of our relationship for a long time, he did it for nothing. Now, if I go back to him, I'm going to pay. Because, and I should, because that's his job. But when we started the podcast, my very first episode, I had him interview me about my vision. Because I'm thinking, what can the first podcast be about? I was like, who do I interview? What do I do? Blah, blah, blah. And I went, no. I know it's not about me, but people need to know what my vision is in order for them to understand where I'm going with it. So he interviewed me for episode number 1, and that was the start.
Well, I actually listened to that episode today on my way here.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, I wanted to have an idea of where, we see where we are today. Where'd you come from, though? Mm-hmm. And, going back all the way through the 172 to find the first one and listening to that, I wanted to tell you, actually, that was a really cool way to start a podcast. Like, the whole basis of the show was you being interviewed.
Yeah.
And laying out the foundation for what you want this to be. Absolutely incredible.
And just like we're talking here, I had no idea what your questions were going to be. I had no idea what his questions were going to be.
And it's different, isn't it?
It is, but it was one of those things that I just felt in my heart. Not that I'm out here to recreate or make a name for myself. The only reason I'm the host is I'm the cheapest one I can find. And I know how to run the equipment. I have since opened it up, and Cara Stevens from 106.3 GLM down in Greenville, when she has time, she comes on and she'll host some, because I would like to have other people hosting, because they look at things different than I do. And, I joke with Cara that I say, it's nice to get a female perspective on some of this stuff. I think it's cool.
Sure.
I think it's neat. I also like the fact that I don't have to be the one always, again, I'm the cheapest one that I can find, but what can we do through networking? And, it's nice when I can bring somebody else in to be the host. And I just started, I said that there was something else that we're doing. I'm starting into a offshoot of Discover Montcalm Podcast. It's part of it, but it's going to be called Chatting Local. Chatting Local is where I can go outside the county line to interview people wherever. And there's a gentleman up in Morley that I've done some work for, and he heard the story about when I did this for my parents, that he went, I want to do this with the people that I know. So he's been contracting with me to do the productions for him, because he has a method that he's putting them out. And we were talking last week when we did the second gentleman. I said, would you mind if I bring you in? He's going to be coming in tomorrow. And I'm going to interview him as a Chatting Local segment to introduce the podcast, that I'm going to take his information and this is just another platform for him to get it out. It'll be under Discover Montcalm, but it'll be a Channing local section because we're going outside the county line. And the two guests that he's brought in, he does them in a two-part series. I'm like, you talk about people that have run up against diversity. The one guy, I'm like, wow, you lived through that. That's amazing. And your attitude is, we talked about maybe sharing some guests.
Yeah.
He might be one I'll put you onto because, you also are looking for people that have kind of hit bottom. Well, his story's pretty interesting, but I won't put that name out to you till after his podcast go on my show. Sorry.
No, fair enough.
I gotta hold a couple things back, but with what you want to do, these kind of people, and we can coexist. We can collaborate and we can help each other.
Collaboration is everything, honestly, in the world, in business. Just working together. We have a common goal. We have a common goal.
We're similar. We're very similar.
Yeah.
Your approach is a little different than mine, but bottom line, we just want to get to know people and learn about them and let them share their story. I'm going a little different path than you, but it's still good information.
Correct, yep. So we've talked about the journey through the podcast and your career and everything like that. We've talked about some of the struggles. One of my favorite questions to ask people, the struggles made you into what you are now. Let's talk about the positive, the ending, the good that came out of all those grinds. Success. It's a polarizing word. To some people, I can pay my bills this week. Success. Other people, you see that orange Lambo out there? That's mine.
Yeah.
Success.
Yeah.
What does the word success mean to you?
Being happy with myself and to be able to live with myself. I may not have millions in the bank, but I've had a great life. Great wife, great family. We've done things together. We enjoy things. And to me, that is success because, I got blessed. The good Lord put this woman in front of me. And there's a story down that path, but we won't. I don't think we got enough time for that one. But, it is the people that have shaped me over the years, the people that I look up to. And, I'm kind of kicking myself because I wish I would have done something like this with my grandfather.
Oh, sure.
There was a really close, personal friend. His name was Don Art from the Morley area. He was my first boss in high school. I wish I would have interviewed him before he passed because other than my father, my dad, he probably put values in me that I didn't realize I was being put values into. And we became long friends. It was sad, but the last time I talked to him was just a month or two before he passed. And, the fact that I got to tell him thank you. Literally.
That's everything. Yeah.
It was one of those things that it was a long ride between here and the home that he was in. But when we sat down the year or two that we had not seen each other, all went away. The stories flowed, but the idea that I was able to say thank you to somebody that, other than my dad, really instilled a value of work and family. And for Don, I will be forever grateful for that. And, I learned, because I made mistakes as a high school kid working at the bus garage. I remember running over the garage door before we were getting ready to put the opener up. And he wanted me to run uptown to get something. I didn't realize it was behind me, and I drove right over it. Well, some people would have just rolled me up and down the other.
Sure.
He went, go get the parts, come back, get a quote, we'll straighten this thing out.
We can fix this.
And I went, that was grace. To be 16, 17 years old and see this in somebody was like, wow. And we became good enough friends that when it came time for me to ask my wife to marry me, my mom knew. Don didn't, but Dorothy, his wife, knew because they owned a campground and we went camping. And I remember that morning waking up, we're out doing cooking breakfast and that. Dorothy walks right on by me. Let me see the ring. But we grew that close so that, the fact that, I was able to say goodbye to him, there's no regrets. I wasn't able to do that with my other grandparents, and I did learn that, when you get an opportunity to say goodbye to somebody, stop what you're doing and go.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what accident is going to be right around the corner, so don't leave it unturned. And some of the people on my podcast have passed. A couple of them very unexpectedly. I have their story.
Yeah.
I've received calls from their family. Thank you for that story. We learn more.
Oh, man.
And I'm like,
yeah.
I didn't realize that was going to be part of my mission. It became part of so now I'm like, okay, I like to do history. I like to do different things. But always be open to change. I didn't know at this point I'd be teaching. I had some touches in teaching, but I had no idea that I was going to be a teacher at a career center. And even though I know production, teaching's a whole different, like, holy crap, I'm in charge of this, but it's fun, and I love seeing the light bulb go out, or not go out, turn on.
Right.
Please don't,
Right.
please don't.
Let's keep the lights on.
Yeah, let's keep the lights on, but when they get to that point, and I think the biggest thing that I learned at the school, I'm teaching digital arts. I'm teaching how to run a camera, do photography, do video, do editing. But the one thing that I didn't know that I was going to be teaching was how to build their self-esteem, to let them have more confidence in themselves. And I'm seeing it, I've only been in this gig for 5 years teaching, in this job. I didn't realize that was in the fine print.
The things you learn along the way, though, right?
Well, yeah. And, we just had the discussion last week. Is it okay to fail? And I had them think about it. I said, now write something down. Is it okay to fail? Write your thoughts. And then they shared it. And I was quite amazed. The bottom line was, yes, we are going to fail. How we get out of that failure is what will build our character. And I'm like, wow.
Man, that's...
and that was, but that's what it comes to. And that's kind of what's happened to you and I, and I guess anybody that's been in business. If you can find a way not to sit and wallow in it, find a way out. And sometimes you have to raise your hand and say, I need help. And that's where networking it comes in for me, is my kids think I know everybody, and I don't. But yet we go places, and my wife goes, my bass player in my band will go places, and he'll go, I'll run into somebody, and he goes, you know everybody. I said, no, I don't. But it is one of those things that, know who to ask. Know who to ask, and, not be afraid to ask.
Well, and if you don't know exactly who to ask, figure it out. Somebody does.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to admit, I don't know what I'm doing right now. Somebody does.
Yeah.
It's up to you to figure out who or where. What do I have to do to figure out the answer to this problem?
And I learned more about you in our podcast that, you kind of had to figure that out. But I think what hit you, because you couldn't really pinpoint.
Yeah.
But I think there was some character built in you by early on that you realized yourself that you had a problem. And that's usually the biggest thing with anything is, do I see the problem? Do I know that the problem exists? Now how do I go from there?
Well, and one thing, not to take over and talk about myself, but one thing I learned at a really early age is also I learned exactly what I did not want to be like. And that's kind of been my driving force behind a lot of things that I've done in life.
I mean, when I was younger, I had a little temper, but I never would let it out. I figured that way. And I remember one time a buddy of mine, we were hanging out at their house, and happened to be in Cedar Springs, a group of friends. One guy backed into my car that I just had repainted, and I come flying out of the car, and he's taller than me, he's bigger than me, and I come up to him, and I'm mad because I didn't have a lot of money, and I just put a lot of money into it.
Yeah.
And I went, and at the last minute, I hit the telephone pole, not him. And to this day, we're still good friends. And he goes, we were talking about it, I think a year or so ago, it just happened to come up in conversation. He goes, I'm sure glad, because I heard that hit. I heard you hit that pole, and going, glad that wasn't my face. But at that moment, I said, I had to learn more about me. That it's okay to get mad, just don't do anything that will harm someone else.
Right.
And I'm not a fighter, but yet I was going to fight that day, and he didn't mean to back into my car. It's an accident.
It's life.
But yet, I learned more about me in that accident by not hitting him. My hand hurt for a while. I'm glad I didn't break anything, but you have to learn from these things.
Well, and that's something that we were talking about earlier too. I hope along the way, I hope you do fail. And I hope that things don't always go completely right, because then that's when you're given the opportunity to learn.
Yeah, we're going to fail.
Yeah.
Just try to find a way to work, and there's resources, and if you've got that person or you persons, reach out.
Yeah.
Ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I got a bunch of people that I network with, but there's a couple guys, we kind of call each other accountability partners. One of them is John up in Black River, New York. Another one's Al down in Chicago, outside of Chicago. We've helped each other in our businesses for a long time. Where, hey, how did you do this? Or I'm thinking about getting this piece of equipment. We became friends, and it turned into one time, one of them had reached out because having a problem with their sons who got into drugs. And we talked about that. It was personal. I didn't know the answers.
Yeah.
But I was somebody that, we kept each other accountable. Love your kid. I don't have the answer. I don't know the magic 1, 2, 3 step formula, but yet he could dump on me, and it was a sounding board. Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure he had the same conversations with his wife, and that was great. But this was just another viewpoint on it. And I told him, I don't have the answer. No way do I have the answer. But, and now both his kids are doing great.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's great.
And worked through it. But, you talk about hitting bottom as a parent, it's got to be tough to see your kid addicted.
And that's a whole nother conversation that we could go down the rabbit hole on, and as I've already stolen almost an hour of your time here, I've got one more for you before I let you go. So we talked about the grind, the successes. Now that you're here, who's to say that this is the top? This isn't it, but what keeps you motivated every day to keep going and try to get to the end goal?
Right now, as I'm entering into that point of life that I'm going to be signing up for Medicare, the word retirement scares me.
Sure.
Do I have enough? Oh, I didn't put enough away, blah, blah, blah. I don't know when that day will be, at this point, maybe 3 years. However, I don't have any other major, I gotta go and do this. I'm happy where I'm at. I want to have the podcast. I just want to get it making money. Not a ton. I'd like to have it be a nice supplemental. And, if in that time period, if Chatting Local becomes its own and Discover stays here, I've been asked by some people to help them build their podcast. If I can be a resource to help people and get a little secondary income off from it. I'm a drummer. Right now I just want to be able to play a little bit. I've had physical therapy on my shoulder. Yeah, it's now feeling good. I want to play, because you don't know what tomorrow's going to be.
Right.
You don't know if you've got tomorrow. We don't want to assume, but I have the love of my wife. Kids are doing good. Have I been the best parent? Probably not. Made a lot of mistakes, but right now in this part of our life, I feel we're all in a good place. I just want to play music. I want to do this, because when I do hit that retirement, I'll probably retire from teaching, but I'm not going to retire from this. Plus, my wife doesn't want me in the house. I mean, this office has been mine since, '87 when we got married. First thing I did was I built this. And, in '87, I guess it wasn't '87, it was in '90 that this, '93, '90. Anyways, '90 this was built. Prior to that, it was that little shed out there.
Yeah.
But I'm content. If things work out and take me in another direction, that's how I got into teaching. I wasn't looking for it. The good Lord said, I think I want you here. He opened that door. I walked in, and I take a lot on faith that I'm teaching because he opened a door for me. I don't know what other doors are open.
Sure.
But I'm not, right now I'm just going down what I know. I love doing the podcast. I love learning about people. And I think that there's another direction that I can take. It's just, I can't afford time-wise to do more than one podcast.
Right.
That's why Chatting Local is going to sneak in. But I've got a couple, 3 years to kind of work that to see if it's even going to be, but it just comes back to what you're doing and what I'm doing. We just want to learn about people.
Right, yep.
So I don't have any magic, I got to reach this next milestone. If I can still play and I'm in my 70s or I'm in my 80s and I'm still able to drum, because where else can I go to release tension and not get arrested for beating things with sticks?
Yeah, right.
And if music is a calming beast, it's my therapy, always has been, because I can get lost in the music. And, I was never good enough to be famous or be on the road. I'm an okay drummer, but I surround myself with other players that also want to play and do things. So I feel that I just am overly blessed right now, and I can't lose sight of that. And I just say thank you, God, for what you provided for me.
Incredible. So my for real last question, one that I wanted to ask you this whole time, and I just hadn't been able to get to it. The Discover Montcalm Podcast. I'm sure you've discovered a lot about Montcalm over the years of doing this. Hit me with the coolest or neatest or most unexpected thing that you've learned about Montcalm County in the years that you've been doing this.
Comes down to the people.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's on a different track. It's learning that path that's cool. I remember having a gal in here, Margaret. She was 99. I actually had to shout.
Yeah.
But to learn her growing up in Truefit when they didn't have refrigerators, they didn't have washers and dryers. They didn't go past Truefit much because it was the horse, how long it took the horse to get from Truefit to Howard City even. The train was a big thing at that point, so that would get them out of the area. but to interview her, to learn, she lived it. I thought, I didn't realize what that podcast was gonna, but when she turned 100 and her daughter invited me to her birthday, and I walked in, and she had, Margaret had hearing problems, but the look in her eye when she went, I didn't know her prior to that, but I sat down and it just felt good to be invited, and I went, that's why I'm doing this, and I don't know if she made 101, but she had a great life.
Sure.
But it's people like that, and then like I mentioned, some people that have passed, way too young, that I now have their story.
Mm-hmm.
And their kids can have that story. I didn't start this thinking that I was doing it for their kids until it happened, and I get a call from a kid, and I'm like, you're welcome. You're welcome. So, DiscoverMontcalmPodcast.com, it's all about the stories.
Well, that was what I was going to let you close with. Go ahead and take the floor. Tell everybody out there who's listening, where can they find the Discover Montcalm Podcast and everything they need to know.
Okay. DiscoverMontcalmPodcast.com. There's Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube that you can go and like us, and that way, if you like and follow us, every time I drop an episode, you can do that. You can go to the DiscoverMontcalmPodcast.com and catch the RSS feed, so you can put it in your favorite podcast browser. So every time that it drops, you can head.
Yep.
Because we're on Apple, Pandora, and iHeart, and then you can Google Discover Montcalm. As I said, I've been really working on a lot of the SEO. So if you know that, you can find us. But when you're on Discover Montcalm Podcast, follow our socials, and not just follow them, like it. You see a story, share it.
Yeah.
But one tip that anybody out there that's doing anything, when you share something on socials, share it with a comment, because your friends are going to look at things. And if you don't say why you shared it, they're probably not going to be watching it unless something's been blown up. You got little kitties or animals. But if you just take the extra 3 minutes to type in why you're sharing it. Hey, I was on Shay's podcast, or Shay's little stories here. Check it out, because I really like the direction that he's going. And then I take your link and I push it out to mine. I've now told people why I think they should listen to this. Not that they should know my story, but I can share your stuff. So whenever that happens for the podcast, we're only going to reach more people when more people share it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, I guess unless you're blowing something up, who doesn't like to watch something getting blown up? I'm a guy, fast cars, show something being blown up, I'm in. Does it affect my life? No, but when there's something that local is happening, share their stories.
Duane, I want to say thank you to you for your time both doing this and what we did before. I hope everybody that's out there listening was able to take something away from this. I know I certainly have. And I thank you very much for your time.
Hey,
look forward to the connection that we've made here today.
We'll cross paths again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, Duane Weed, Discover Montcalm Podcast. Thank you to everybody who took the hour plus out of their night to watch this video, and I hope that you were able to take something from it as well. Looking forward to doing more of these again, and thanks to everybody for taking the time. I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you.